ever since President Trump decided to illegally and unconstitutionally bomb a Syrian airfield, the media has pushed this idea that if you are against those strikes, then you're against humanitarian issues. You don't care about the suffering of Syrian children. So they've kind of set up this false dichotomy to where if you're against intervention and you're against war, then you're the bad guy. You want more suffering to ensue, but if you are in favor of intervention, then you're the good person. You want to make sure that we rescue those Syrian children. And the problem with this is if we get involved in Syria, that will lead to more civilian deaths, because wars ultimately lead to death and destruction, and us getting involved will not make matters any better. And the media has constantly pushed this narrative because, you know, the political establishment on the left and the right, they are in lockstep with the Pentagon, who's currently pushing for war. Now, I think the perfect example of the media trying to push this narrative can be found on CNN with Kate Bolduan.
She wants for the children of Syria to be able to play and go to school. She's pleading for help. So you hear that plea from her, you see the images coming out of Syria, and you think the best policy for the United States right now is to do nothing.
Does the media care about humanitarian issues? No. If they do, then they're horribly misguided, because there is no such thing as a humanitarian war. That's propaganda. That's what our government, that's what the Pentagon tells us to gin up public support for their interventionist foreign policies, and it's not acceptable. And if the media and pundits in the media did, in fact, care about suffering, care about children and women being slaughtered, then I want to know where their outrage is for these humanitarian issues. The first one is in Myanmar. So Muslims are currently undergoing a genocide in Myanmar. They're being slaughtered, women and children. They're being raped. And it is a situation that is horrific. So The Intercept explains the Rohingya Muslim minority in the northern Rakhine state have been shot, stabbed, starved, robbed, raped, and driven from their homes in the hundreds of thousands. In December, while the world focused on the fall of Aleppo, more than a dozen Nobel laureates published an open letter warning of a tragedy in Rakhine, amounting to ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity. In February, a report by the United Nations documented how the Burmese army's attacks on the Rohingya were widespread as well as systematic, thus indicating the very likely commission of crimes against humanity. More than half of the 101 Rohingya women interviewed by the UN investigators across the border in Bangladesh said they had suffered rape or other forms of sexual violence at the hands of security forces. They beat and killed my husband with a knife, one survivor recalled. 5 of them took off my clothes and raped me. My 8-month-old son was crying of hunger when they were in my house because he wanted to breastfeed, so to silence him, they killed him too, with a knife. Now, obviously, you know, if you're a human, then your heart will break when you hear about that story, when you hear about the suffering that's going on. However, the media hasn't really given this story much attention. They haven't covered it. You don't see, widespread outrage about this genocide occurring like you do when it comes to Syria. And this is because the Pentagon, the military-industrial complex, they want to create support for intervention in Syria because they've been salivating over Syria for a really long time. It's what they want. Now, am I implying that we should be trying to push the media to get us involved in Myanmar? Of course I'm not, because if we intervene there, then we're only going to make matters worse, because by bombing a country, there will be civilian casualties. But what I am saying is that if the media did in fact care about humanitarian crises, then they would cover this issue. They would talk about it, and, just talking about it can do a lot. If there's international outrage, which would be facilitated by the media actually covering it, then maybe the Burmese army would be inclined to stop, or at least hold back a little bit. But the media doesn't care. They care about doing what the military-industrial complex wants. But I mean, since the Pentagon wants a war with Syria, all of a sudden, we're humanitarians. But I mean, if they want to talk about Syria, let's talk about Syria, because I've got another humanitarian crisis for you, one that we started. So according to The Intercept, Syrian activists and first responders accused the United States of killing dozens of civilians in an airstrike that mistakenly targeted a mosque in the rebel-held village of Al-Jannah on the evening of March 16th. Confronted with these claims, a Pentagon spokesman, Navy Captain Jeff Davis, told The Intercept that they were mistaken. The area was extensively surveilled prior to the strike in order to minimize civilian casualties, Davis said. We deliberately did not target the mosque, but as Human Rights Watch reported this week, witnesses in Al-Jannah said that the building destroyed by two armed Reaper drones firing Hellfire missiles was the newly built Omar ibn al-Khattab Mosque, where about 300 civilians had gathered for the Muslim night prayer. At least 38 people were killed in the attack, which included the dropping of a 500-pound bomb. While the U.S. authorities appear to have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the building they attacked, they also appear to have inadequately understood the pattern of life in the area, argues Human Rights Watch. The U.S. seems to have gotten several things fundamentally wrong in this attack, and dozens of civilians paid the price, Oli Salvong, the Deputy Emergencies Director at Human Rights Watch, said in a statement. According to the Pentagon's own data, the U.S.-led coalition bombing Syria and Iraq has killed between 102 and 396 civilians in 18,645 strikes from August 2014 to the end of February. The three new reports on the bombing of Al-Jannah suggest that the actual number of civilians killed in American bombings could be far higher. There was universal outrage from the Democratic Party, from the Republican Party, from the media when Assad killed his own civilians, allegedly. But when we kill more civilians, there's no outrage. I mean, certainly the media has talked about this briefly, but it isn't garnering the attention that Assad's attack generated, and this is because we were looking to demonize Assad, and he's a bad person. You don't really have to do that. He does that on his own, but we wanted to demonize him without an investigation. We wanted to say that he attacked his own citizens with chemical weapons. We didn't even want to bother having an independent investigation, yet when we kill civilians in Syria and Iraq, there's no outrage. So, to all of the people in the mainstream media who want to lead us into another war that potentially will be never ending with another country, ask yourself this: do we really care about humanitarian issues, or are we just doing the bidding of the military-industrial complex? Because if you did care about these issues, if you are a humanitarian like you purport to be, you would be talking about these issues. You would be just as outraged at the genocide being committed in Myanmar. You'd be just as outraged when we kill civilians as you are when Assad kills civilians. So I want to know where the media's outrage is when it comes to these humanitarian issues that we're not talking about.
Support this podcast by joining the independent progressive media revolution today at humanistreport.com.